Hello everyone, thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about driving financial performance through project portfolio management, and it's brought to you by Project Objects. In a moment we'll be starting, but first there's just a couple of administrative items. Audio today will be delivered through your computer, so if you have any difficulties, please check its audio settings. This webinar is also eligible for professional development units from the PMI, and we will give you the details that at the end of the event. We'll also be recording the session and we'll email you access details afterwards along with a link to a copy of the slides. Finally, there are a couple of polling questions that we will get to throughout the webinar, and we'd love you to participate in those, so be ready for them as we go through. My name is John Chandler and I'm the Sales Director for Projects IT. I'll be moderating today's event, and I'd like to hand you over now to Andy Jordan. Andy Jordan is President of realisation Consulting in Ontario, Canada. They're a management consulting firm with a very strong emphasis on organisational transformation, portfolio management and PMO. Andy has a track record of success in managing large business critical projects, programs and portfolios in Europe and North American industries. They are as diverse as investment banking, software development, call centres, telecommunications and corporate education. Andy, I'm going to hand over to you now if you'd like to take over, and if you'd like to start the presentation, let's commence.
Thank you, John, and thank you everybody for joining us this afternoon. So let me just go straight into the presentation, and I'll just quickly run through some of the things that we're going to cover today. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to what my theories, my concepts for this presentation. Talk a little bit about PPM overview, then talk about portfolio phases and specifically how financial performance fits into to those portfolio phases. We'll talk a little bit about what the requirements are for success. So if you like some of the things you hear, what do you need to do to make it happen in your organization? And then, as John mentioned, we're going to have a couple of polling questions today. I don't see why I should do all the work, so you should have to do some work as well. So I'm just going to start off with a polling question. So give me just a couple of seconds here and I'll launch that for you. You should see it appearing in just a little bit of time right now. So what I'm really asking is, how effective and efficient do you feel that your current project portfolio management process is? So you should see that right now, and if you could just sort of take a few seconds and answer, and then we'll see what the results are. John, do you have any thoughts as to what people might say?
One of the biggest challenges that we see in organisations time and time again is it's not so much realising the benefits, but it's been able to manage and report on the fact that the benefits have been achieved and to what degree, and linking that back with the corporate agenda from the boardroom, really. So that's quite a big issue that we find. So measuring what's happened and if we've made the deliverable is a big key point for us.
Yeah, and that seems to be where we're going. I'll just give people a few more seconds and then I'll close it down and we'll show the result. So let's just, looks like it's stable, so let me just close that. And what we're seeing is, well, we had a small number of people said that they feel that they manage costs and benefits well, and about the same number said that the benefits are managed well, but could do a little bit better at the cost side. But then the second most popular answer, organizations felt that they manage costs well, but maybe not doing as well at benefits realization, which was your point, John. And then rather disappointingly, I guess, but maybe not surprisingly, is that we've got almost half of the audience, 43%, said that they don't manage costs or benefits well. So room for improvement on both sides of the equation. So hopefully everyone is seeing that now, and hopefully that means that you'll be able to get something out of this webinar, because clearly almost half of you think that both sides have some opportunities for improvement. So I'm just going to take those responses away from you, and we'll go back to the slides, and I'll try and provide you a few answers. All right, that should have disappeared now. So let's have a look at where I'm coming from. What's my background to the points I want to make today? Well, it's no surprise to anybody that organizations are always looking to improve. It doesn't matter how efficient and how effective you are, organizations always expect us to do better. I've never yet had a conversation with a client or with a manager where they said to me, you know, Andy, you did really well last year, so you don't have any goals or objectives for this coming year. You just rest on your laurels. It's never happened to me. I kind of suspect it's never going to happen. It doesn't matter how well you do. People are always looking for us to do better and better in the next performance. They're looking for that absolute improvement. You know, if you did it in, I don't know, you were 90% accurate in delivering on time, on scope, on budget, that's pretty darn good, but organizations are going to expect us to do 92% or 95% in the next year. So that absolute improvement has to improve to as close to perfect as we can make it. But then maybe more important than that is the relative performance against our competitors. We don't always live in an environment where we can be absolutely perfect, but we have to try and live in an environment where we are better, whatever we define better as being, than our competitors. And in different economic climates, better might mean that we are reducing our costs, we're increasing our margins. In more expansive market conditions, maybe it's more about market share. It's about time to market. So those variables move and shift depending on the economy, depending on the industry that we're in. But relative performance is almost more important than absolute performance. To deliver that success, there's a number of things that we have to try and control. And unless we can get all of those things right, you know, success is going to be limited somewhat. We have to make sure that we choose the right projects. If we don't choose the right projects up front, it's going to be very difficult to deliver the kind of success that we want. If you choose the wrong option, then you're lost before you start. Of course, we have to execute those projects effectively. Anyone who's been involved in project management for any length of time knows that it's all about managing to those constraints. But we also have to maximize the return on the investments in those projects. At the end of the day, no one cares what we deliver. It's what the business benefits of those deliverables are, because that's where the benefits to the organization really accrue. The organization doesn't start making money just because the project has delivered its results. It starts making money because those results start impacting in the market. Project portfolio management, PPM, it can help with all of those categories, but we have to make sure that it is applied appropriately, and that's what I'm going to try and talk about through today's session. So let's talk a little bit about the concept of project portfolio management, or PPM, as I'll probably refer to it as we go forward. And PPM is a relatively new concept, but it's becoming more accepted now. The PMI has recently launched its portfolio management certification program, and that to me is always a little bit of an indication that it's becoming a mainstream concept. It's not just about software anymore, although we'll talk a little bit about software later on. It's a key part of it. So those of you that have been involved in project management, you know it's about defining and delivering the deliverables. It's talking about delivering scope on time and on budget with consideration for quality and risk. That's what project's all about. As project managers, our success is defined by whether or not the scope of the project is delivered when it should be delivered for the amount it should be delivered for. Portfolio management takes a different view on it and says it's about delivering the business benefits successfully. From a portfolio standpoint, a project is simply a tool. It's simply a vehicle that allows the benefits to be realized. The project is the deliverable of the widgets, the product, the service, the efficiency, whatever, the process improvement, whatever it might be. But it's only when that deliverable actually makes a difference to our customer market, to our operational efficiency, to our process efficiency, to reducing our risk exposure, whatever the specific target is, that's really where we start delivering benefits to the organization. So that comes from developing the ideas that are capable of achieving the business goals in the first place. Portfolio management should have a role in making sure that the right business goals are identified and then the right initiatives to match those business goals are selected. Making sure that we create a level playing field for actually selecting those projects, so completing consistent business cases that allow for comparison of apples versus apples, for want of a better term. We have to have elements of portfolio modeling. We have to be able to look at different combinations of project mixes and figure out what's the most appropriate for us in terms of our goals and objectives, but also our organizational capability and organizational capacity. And then finally, it's about ensuring that the benefits that we expect to deliver are actually delivered. And if they're not, we have to be prepared to take corrective action at a portfolio level, because ultimately the portfolio is only successful if it ensures that the goals and objectives of the organization for that period, for that year, for that quarter, whatever it might be, are actually achieved. So let's look at some of that in a little bit more detail. Let's start with the idea of the right ideas. And I got a little comment there that I thought was sort of vaguely witty, at least at the time I wrote it, which is, if you don't plant the right seeds, you can't harvest the right crop. The idea there is that if we don't choose the right projects up front, it really doesn't matter how well we execute on those projects. We're never going to be able to deliver on what we expect. So to do that, the organization needs to, first off, clearly communicate the areas of focus for the goals and objectives. In other words, what is it that in the next period, the next planning period, the organization wants to achieve? Is it targeting market expansion? Is it targeting efficiencies? Is it a balance between them? Is it looking for top-line revenue gain or bottom-line profit gain? Because there's different approaches, different strategies for achieving that. Is it looking to focus in a specific market, or is it looking to target a specific competitor? All of that is important for the organization to understand, because unless that is understood, we can't harvest the right product ideas. We can't make sure that the right individual initiatives are selected in the first place. And if we start off with the wrong projects, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody that we're going to deliver the wrong results. You know, you're not going to get a 20% return on a particular market if you invest in a project that, if it goes perfectly, is only going to deliver a 5% return. We also need to make sure that the ideas that are identified are nurtured, they're developed, to make sure they do align with those goals. Just as a farmer won't plant seeds in his field and then leave it alone for 6 months and come back and see what's happened, you need to make sure that there's actually work done to help the ideas grow, to work with individuals to develop those ideas, to consolidate similar ideas, to make sure that all the different approaches are considered, that all the different alternatives are considered, that we challenge the ideas to make sure that they're robust enough to stand up to all the potential pitfalls that they could face. We also need to make sure that those ideas, those seeds, come from everywhere. I always laugh when I see organizations that send out an email to, all and sundry in management levels saying, we're entering our next annual planning period, so everyone start thinking of their project ideas. It's almost like it's only managers that are expected to have ideas, and they're only expected to have them for a few short weeks in the year when planning is going on. Well, that's not the reality that I've ever seen. People have ideas all throughout the year, usually at the most unusual times when something just occurs to them. And it sure as heck isn't just managers that have good ideas. Good ideas come from everywhere, and sometimes the frontline employees, who are the people who are facing these challenges day in and day out, are the source of the best ideas we could ever have. So we need to make sure that there is a PPM process in place to not only encourage those ideas to come forward, but to capture them and then help them to develop. So what does PPM have to do in that? Well, I see PPM here as an independent, objective body. It may be part of a PMO if that's how your organization is structured, but the key thing here is it's not sales, it's not marketing, it's not engineering, it's not finance. It's an independent body that looks to focus on helping people to collaborate, helping people to share ideas, to use the tools that the organization has effectively, and bring people from different areas together to develop those common ideas, to collaborate together and create some synergy. so that we get better ideas than if people worked alone. And most important of all, that we don't lose those ideas because somebody at the front line thought of something and didn't have anywhere to take that idea. PPM can also offer what I call here a sanity check. It makes sure that we do an early review of the ideas that come up to make sure, is this really aligned with what we need to do as an organization? Let's make sure that we're not putting excessive effort and excessive money, this is a financial presentation after all, into ideas that have little chance of delivering the needed benefits. The cheapest time to kill something is when the least work has been done. So let's have PPM focusing on those ideas early, so that if we need to do something that says, you know what, this isn't working, let's divert attention elsewhere, or let's adjust this suggestion a little bit, let's adjust this idea and tweak it so it does better align, we can do that before we spend a lot of money on it. PPM also allows for an enterprise-wide view that prevents duplication of effort and maximizes efficiency. It looks like my picture got a little bit larger all of a sudden there, so we lost efficiency there, but that's what that last word is. So it makes sure that we have a single process, a single approach to making sure that we are taking all of the ideas from the organization and consolidating them centrally. We don't want one group doing it, then another group doing it, because that's going to lead to duplication. It's going to lead to things getting lost, things getting missed. It's just a bad idea. Once we've done that idea piece, and once PPM's facilitated that collaboration, that sharing and developing of ideas, the next thing we need to do is the business casing. Inevitably, there's going to be a situation when we all sit down and have those planning discussions, or there's the review of which projects are going to get approved. There's always going to be more project proposals presented than there is budget to be approved. There's never been a situation that I'm aware of where someone said, hey, we've done all the projects we can do and we've still got several £1 million or several million euros left over. It's just not going to happen. So there has to be an exercise in selecting one project over another approach. And it's clearly important to get that right. If we don't choose the right project, we're not going to get the right results. That should be obvious to everybody. But in many organizations, the idea of a business case is not consistent. Different departments present different types of information. They may even use different financial calculations. I know of one major organization here in Canada that employs 30,000 people. It should know better. That uses about 5 or 6 different cost of capital calculations. Well, clearly that's not how the bank operates. The finance department in this bank has one cost of capital that it should use, but instead it decides to keep that to itself, and departments have to guess on what cost of capital should be. And that's a pretty fundamental financial calculation when we're trying to decide which projects to select and which projects to approve. There's those inconsistent approaches. You may see a business case that is presented with all the same information from one department as another department, but if the actual information is presented in a different way, there's no standard template, there's no easy way to compare, well, it's a little bit like trying to compare apples and oranges. It's difficult to know which one's best and which one's second best. It's nice to know that the payback period on this particular project is 18 months, but if another project is not reporting on payback period, or another project proposal is not reporting on payback period, instead it's giving you a rate of return for the next 5 years, well, it's harder to do it. You could calculate the payback period based on that, but it's more work. It's less consistent. And often when we have that lack of consistency, we find that the analysis is either incomplete or inaccurate, or frequently both. And trying to expect our executives to make smart decisions with bad information, it's just not going to happen. So what does PPM do here? Well, it helps to provide that standardization. It helps to make sure that we have consistent, objective criteria that we can make our selection decisions based on. It may be nothing more complex than providing standardized templates, which include standard financial calculations, so that everybody who wants to present a business case has to use that same template, which the portfolio management and finance functions can provide some assistance with the completion of. It allows us then to compare apples with apples. We can look at Project A and Project B and decide which one is more aligned with our objectives. We have to consider risk, we have to consider quality, we have to consider the market scope. There's a lot of variables that have to go into it that still require that executive decision making, but it does mean that we're now comparing across a level playing field. It also helps to get rid of what I like to think of as the sales pitches. If anyone sat in any kind of project selection or approval committee meeting at any point in the past, you'll know that there are department heads who will lobby for their own initiatives. If an initiative has come from sales, then you can expect the head of sales to be very, very keen on it. And to stereotype a little bit, maybe the head of marketing is not so keen on it because he or she thinks that their initiative is much better because it's sales and marketing are going to have better ideas. Sales, on the other hand, are going to poo-poo what marketing has to offer because they're sales and that's what they do. And I know I'm stereotyping, but we've all seen those conversations. But we also have to make sure, and this is important from PPM, PPM is not just objective. It's not just numbers-based. PPM functions, portfolio managers have to be smart business people. If you think about some of the most innovative products, some of the most innovative projects that were ever completed, they would never have been approved if it was based only on objective criteria. Apple is a prime example. Apple has been defining markets for more than a decade now. Going back to, I guess, from a consumer standpoint, going back to the original iPod and the idea of digital music back in the early 2000s. If that was just looked at from an objective criteria, the project would never have been approved. You need to have vision. You need to have the ability to take a risk, and that's where executives earn their money. But you also need to make sure that those risks are as smart as possible. So the objective piece here is vitally important and something that portfolio management can bring to the table. Next piece of it, it's not just about, yep, this is the project we want to do and move forward. There has to be some element of modeling and selection. There has to be the concept of, if we do these projects, what are the impacts? We think these 10, these 50, these 100 projects are the ones that we want to approve. These are the ones that we think deliver us the best opportunities to achieve our results. But we have to make sure that we've got the mix right, because approving these projects is going to have a real impact on the organization's ability to function. So we have to consider, what is the distribution of investment? All projects now involve technology, but are we going to be doing something that the technology group can actually cope with? Or are we putting about 4 or 5 times the amount of work through them that we've ever expected them to deliver before, and are they geared up to deal with that? Do we have appropriate levels of diversification for the benefit types and the benefit sources? The idea that you don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. Do we have the right mix of operational versus capital investment? Any of you that are involved in finance will understand that there's an important part of having capital investment here because it's handled differently than operating budget. So we have to have that right mix. If everything's done on capital and nothing on the operations side, it can cause some problems. Same with the other way around. What about the timing? Not just of the investment up front, making sure that we've got projects distributed appropriately throughout the year for the right month, the right quarter, but also the timing of the returns. Is it better to have a portfolio of projects that is going to deliver a 20% return but see nothing for 2 years, or would we rather see something that averages only a 12% return but starts to deliver benefits within 3 months of the start of the portfolio? I don't know. It depends on the organization. It depends on the priorities. It depends on a lot of different variables, but it's an important consideration. We also have to think about organizational capacity. Can the organization deal with the influx of this many projects? And that's not just a case of resourcing, although that's a key part of it, but can we physically manage this many different projects? Do we have a project execution infrastructure in place? Do we have the right tools in place to deal with this? If we don't, it's not that we shouldn't do it, it's that we may have to do other work to prepare ourselves for it. There is also obviously the concept of resource capacity for it, and that's not just getting more people. It's making sure that logistically you've got somewhere for those people to sit, that you've got the infrastructure for those people if you bring them in, whether you bring in consultants and contractors or whether you bring in permanent employees. organizational capability. Do the people that we have the right skills to do this work? So if we're looking at doing a major new software initiative, do we have enough people available to us who are familiar with that software product? If we don't, then we've got to train, we've got to hire for that particular capability, and that's all going to take time, that's all going to take money. And then something that is often overlooked is risk tolerance and risk exposure. In a very good economy where we want to try and expand market share, we may be prepared to accept more risk, get to market before our competitors, than we would be if we were in a down market and a more conservative organization. We also have to make sure that we understand what our risk exposure is. When we approve these projects, what are we really saying our current exposure levels are? Because we can manage that exposure, but that takes money away from actual execution work, and it also means that until that management starts taking effect, the organization is exposed to that level of risk, and we have to make sure that if things go badly wrong, the organization can absorb those risks. And too many organizations completely ignore that risk part of it. So with all of these variables, where does that leave portfolio management? Well, portfolio management, when it comes to modeling and selection, it can help to create a window, a picture of the organizational capability and capacity. It can help provide the executive decision makers with a view of what do we currently have available to us, not just in terms of resource numbers with the traditional resource pool, but also the idea of what kind of skills do we have. If we don't have all of the skills that we need or the right number of people with those skills, how quickly can we upskill for them? What's the cost likely to be of buying those skills in? What's the cost likely to be dollars, pounds, euros, and time of bringing our people up to speed with them? Can we even grow or upskill? Do we have the ability to get those people skilled? You can't take just anybody and teach them how to understand C# programming. You know, you've got to take somebody who's got those right fundamental skills. If we don't have them, can we bring them into the organization? Are they available in the marketplace that we operate within? Portfolio management can also start creating risk profiles. They can start understanding the exposure we have, understanding the risk capacity we have. I know organizations are very, very wary about putting formal budgets aside for dealing with contingency or dealing with management reserves, but at the end of the day, if the organization is exposed to those risks, it needs to be prepared to write a check to cover those risks. And if it doesn't have the capacity to do so, that's a potential problem. It wouldn't be the first organization that went bust because it didn't understand its risk exposure. And then the idea of tolerance. What kind of tolerance are we prepared to accept in this market? What kind of tolerance are we prepared to accept in this particular organization? And then what kind of risk are we allowed to accept in a highly regulated industry? Finance, medical, you know, that sort of thing, where tolerance is not necessarily, risk tolerance is not necessarily something that you have much say over because it's regulated for you depending on the markets. Portfolio management can also help with analysis of the alternatives, identifying recommended approaches based on tool-driven modeling, and then ensuring appropriate distribution of the initiatives. And those last 2 points, it's about making sure that we've got the right balance, the right financial balance, return and investment, the right risk balance, because that obviously has financial implications, the right distribution of work across capability, across capacity, and just balance in the organization. And also the right balance for the goals and objectives of the organization. The set of projects, the suite of potential portfolio elements that offers the best chance of delivering the goals and objectives of the organization might not be the best projects for us to actually take on. If you want to retire to the Caribbean with £5 million, well, buying a lottery ticket might be a good way to get that £5 million in one fell swoop. But it's probably not the best long-term strategy because the odds of success are remarkably low. Extreme example, but same thing applies here. You may have a set of projects that will deliver all of the goals and objectives of the organization in theory, but it may be that unless things go absolutely perfectly right, that's never going to happen. and you may be better off selecting a set of projects that may only deliver 90 or 80% of those goals and objectives, but have a much closer to 100% chance of success. It's all about getting that right balance. Portfolio managers don't make those decisions. They help the decision makers to see what the options are so that a more intelligent decision can be made. Once that's done, then we can start worrying about project execution. This is obviously the point where most projects start, but in reality, this is where we actually start doing the focus of execution work instead of planning work. It's a shift for portfolio management, but a lot of the work has already been done at this point. As projects go forward, obviously there's going to be variances from plan. The best plan in the world is still only a plan. It's going to be wrong. There's going to be changes in the project deliverables. There's going to be changes in the cost-benefits equation. And there's a portfolio management function. We have to understand what that is. The projects aren't existing in a vacuum. They're not approved and then left on their own as if they're individual initiatives. The changes that happen on an individual project are going to impact the organization's ability to achieve its goals. If we're not going to get the financial return we expected, if we're going to get the same financial return, but we're only going to get it later, if we're going to get the same financial return, but the cost of the investment is increasing, those all change the cost-benefit equation. Those need to be considered because potentially we now have to make a different decision about the project. So this idea, and I mentioned it earlier, of the project execution approach as being the very tactical, the triple constraint, you can throw in quality and risk there if you want, that doesn't work. From a portfolio management standpoint, we have to look at this to say the deliverables are far less important than the impact of those project deliverables on the organizational goals and objectives. We must be prepared to sacrifice some of those constraints in order to protect business performance. We may remove scope from a project. We may add budget to a project if that's the right strategy for making sure the goals and objectives are met. It may be better to spend more money to increase the cost side of the equation in order to preserve schedule because the long-term benefits are worth it. On the other hand, it may be better to allow the project to delay for a little bit because the additional cost can't be justified. There may even be a situation where a project that is doing perfectly well may get killed simply because the deliverable that it can make, the contribution it can make to the goals and objectives is no longer sufficient, and we need to divert those resources elsewhere. We have to maintain that strategic focus, the total cost of the portfolio, the total return of the portfolio, not just dollar amount, but also the timing of that return, and making sure that the risks and the quality are appropriate for what we need to do that. So we're managing those projects as tools to achieve our business results. And then benefits realization, the one that, as John mentioned, is always a little bit challenging. Many organizations fail to focus on this. They don't actually consider benefits realization at all in some cases after the project has been approved. It's part of the business case, but after that, the project delivers, you hand off to the operational leader, the head of the department, and then it never actually gets tracked. There's never any accountability. And for sure, in many organizations, there's no way to tie the project's results back to the department's or the organization's performance. And I've heard many department heads say to me, oh, well, you can't do that. You can't really say that we can track it because it's just part of the product then. We probably have made some of those sales, but we probably only made some of those sales because of the new features that we added. Well, I don't buy that argument. If you can track it based on the business case up front, you can track it when you've got real data. You may have to make some assumptions. I'm fine with that as long as those assumptions are documented and as long as those assumptions are consistent. But at least we can look at the relative performance of the sales of a product, the cost of operations, whatever it is that we're supposed to be improving, and look and see whether or not there was a switch in the trend of performance at the time the project delivered, and if so, how significant that switch was. At the moment, just doesn't happen. It's seen as an operational task. It's owned by the client stakeholder, and let's face it, they've got a vested interest in ensuring that it's successful because, in all likelihood, their annual performance, their goals and objectives are dependent on that success. So what does PPM do here? Well, that's a strong statement, my first bullet point there. Benefits realization is the sole purpose of PPM, but I truly believe it. Portfolio management is about delivering the goals and objectives of the organization. Well, benefits realization is where that happens. Everything that has happened up to this point is aimed at ensuring that the actual benefits align with the planned benefits. Now, if the plan's wrong, well, we need to learn from that. We need to improve the quality of our business planning up front. But this is about making sure that what we said we would deliver is actually delivered. We actually get the financial returns when we expect to get them, because that's what's going to define success. Yes, some projects will be about regulatory compliance and things like that, so it's an indirect financial benefit, but still we can tie everything back to financial benefits one way or another. PPM needs to be an independent, objective measure of performance. I have no problem with the department head physically owning this, but the portfolio manager has to make sure that accurate tracking happens. That probably requires some kind of partnership with finance. And it's about creating a more complete understanding of where the success for the organization is coming from, which in turn drives those continuous improvements to the quality of our forecasting and planning. Where are we inaccurate in our plans or in our forecasts? Where do we have problems in execution? Did we have the right plans? Did we have the right business cases, but something went wrong during the execution phase? Or is the issue that we're just not very good at achieving the benefits that we expected to deliver? Or in some cases, we may be achieving them, but we're not very good at measuring them. And that's really all that PPM has to do throughout a portfolio. And really, I mean, if you can't do that, well, I don't know why you're around. And I joke, of course, it's a huge undertaking. But we'll have a look in just a second at how we can actually try and start a journey down that path. You should now be seeing another poll, and this time we're asking, where is the biggest opportunity for financial improvement in your organization? And give everybody a little bit of time to vote on that. John, you have any thoughts as to where we might see this?
There's no one answer to that, Andy. It varies tremendously in organisations. We usually find that when organisations come and deploy something like this, there's usually a significant business benefit, but I couldn't actually put hand on heart and say there's a consistent theme that I could identify.
Yeah, and that's pretty much, I think, what we're seeing here as well. We'll give people a little bit more time to vote, but we're seeing that there is some consistency in the answers. Everything's getting votes. So it looks like the number of votes is just slowing down a little bit. So let me just close that, and I'll share the results with everybody. And you see that there was a strong winner. 60% of people said that the real problem is in failing to achieve the planned benefits, but selecting the wrong projects up front and problems in executing those approved projects also got 20% of the vote each. So it's not as though we've got just one problem to alleviate, but I think, as we indicated up front, failing to achieve the planned benefits is a little bit of an issue. So let me just hide that and just go through the last few slides. All right. So what do we need to do for success? Well, the most important thing is organizational commitment. All the things that I've talked about today can't be done by one person saying, hey, I got a good idea, let's do this. You have to have a commitment to recognize that portfolio management lives from idea generation all the way through to benefits realization. To go back to my analogy from the early slides, from the planting of the seed or selecting of which seeds to plant all the way through to the harvesting of the crop. It has to tie into organizational key performance indicators. All the people in the organization who are held accountable to this need to have it tie into what they're measured on. If you've got department heads measured on different targets than the projects are trying to deliver in terms of goals and objectives for the organization, you're never going to get that focus. You also have to have support of all of those executives. Back to the idea of the KPIs, if somebody puts department ahead of organization, that's going to undermine the ability to deliver on this. And you know what it's like. If a department head says that's not really important, then that's the mindset that everybody in that department is going to have. So it requires a real commitment. You also need consistency. This is going to take time, and it's only going to work if it's understood to be the new way of executing strategic initiatives. If it's something that is done occasionally and then ignored, it won't get traction, and it'll just be another good idea that falls by the wayside. And it has to involve everybody in the organization. The idea of idea generation coming from everybody, that's real. They have to be encouraged. When we get to project execution, the sponsors, the executives, all the way through to the most junior team member need to believe in this concept. They need to recognize that a project or a part of a project deliverable might be sacrificed in order to protect the portfolio, in order to make sure that the goals and objectives, the financial returns on the portfolio are achieved. You also need patience, and maybe that's the most important part here. Planning cycles are long. Annual planning, by definition, happens once a year. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen through a revolutionary approach. It's going to come from evolution. And the early results may just identify that things were worse than we thought they were. So it may actually take time for things to get worse before they can get better. We also have to recognize that this isn't just about money. Yes, ultimately, money is the reason that organizations exist. Even not-for-profit and even public sector organizations, they're still driven by money to some degree. Accountability for spending public money, distributing money to worthy causes without absorbing too much in administrative overhead. It's still about money. So we have to make sure that we have to focus on the right types of initiatives for that sustainable long-term growth. Investing in the right kind of tools, the right kind of software to help track this up front is a small price to pay for the kind of measurement and capability you've got down the road. You can't just focus on short-term return on investment, because organizations are much bigger than that. You've got to have a strategic focus. You've got to have a mix that delivers returns in the short term to keep the money available for further investment, but also is providing that path to long-term growth. You've got to be prepared to invest in order to allow and facilitate that growth down the road. You also have to recognize that if you do this wrong, you may alienate those employees to deliver the success. This is about organizational creativity. It's about making sure that the entire organization gets what's going on, that there is a process in place for ensuring that the organization can improve its financial performance in all areas. That takes the focus off of the star, off of the individual high achiever, and puts it more on the organization. And sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge to work with, but it's important to be able to do that.
I'd just like to thank everybody for attending. I know we talked about some information regarding PDUs. This webinar is eligible for Category C PDU from the PMI, and you can claim it through the PMI's website by selecting Category C and then following the instructions. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you to Andy for the content. I think it was excellent. I hope you all got something from it. We look forward to seeing you on the next webinar, and I'd just like to wish everybody a good day. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.